After 108 runnings of the Indianapolis 500-mile race, the race has been won by over 50 American pilots, but of those, only a handful have actually been from Indiana. So who were Indiana's sons that were lucky enough to bring home her biggest prize? The first Indiana-born winner came in just the second race, when Daviess County product Joe Dawson won the 1912 500-mile sweepstakes. The young buck from Odin started off as a stock boy at Marmon under Haroon's team in 1906 as a teenager. An adept engineer, Dawson began driving for partner team Nordyke Marmon and had early success at IMS in the years prior to the first 500. Dawson would race for Marmon in the infamous 1910 Vanderbilt Cup race on Long Island. Hitting a spectator on the course who had broken both legs and lied motionless, Dawson pulled into the pits. Through tears, he cried to his crew about the man he had just killed. The crew was unable to work on the car for several minutes before relaying the news to the abject Dawson that the man wasn't mortally injured. Snapping out of his panic, Joe rejoined the race, going on to finish second, only 22 seconds behind the winner, but his hard-charging style after the accident earned him the nickname the Indiana Whirlwind by the press. And the Indiana Whirlwind raced for Marmon alongside Haroon for the inaugural 500, finishing in 5th place. For the 1912 500, he was loaned by Marmon to drive for the National Motor Company, another Indianapolis constructor owned by IMS co-founder Arthur Newby. Dawson and his riding mechanic chased Ralph DePalma's lightning-quick Mercedes after a short relief stint from Don Hare. It's true that IMS chose her winners even back then, as DePalma's piston rod would break on lap 199 after leading the last 196 laps. Dawson passed the stricken Mercedes for the win, as DePalma and his riding mechanic desperately attempted to push their stricken mount across the finish line. 22-year-old Dawson winced as everyone shook his blistered hands in victory lane before announcing to the throngs, "Gee, I'm hungry." But his good luck would never return at IMS. Bumped in 1913 and an ill-fated attempt in 1914 led to a career-ending crash that crushed his ribcage. Joe relocated to Philly to continue work as a superintendent for Marmon Motors. He served on the AAA Technical Committee later in life and would participate in pre-race ceremonies for the 1928 and 1937 races. Dawson died at the age of 56 of a heart attack, carrying out his duties inspecting the racing service at Langhorne Speedway in 1946. And the Indiana Whirlwind would be the youngest 500 champion until Troy Ruttman won the race in 1952, also at age 22. Howard "Howdy" Wilcox was born in Crawfordsville, but grew up in Indianapolis. Long nicknamed Cocky, Wilcox was a colorful character and would stand out in races wearing colorful silk shirts and ties along with his trademark checkered hat. Like Dawson, Wilcox raced for the Indianapolis-based National Motor Vehicle Team and won his first race at a 100-mile sprint at IMS in 1910. He drove for National to 14th in the inaugural 500 and 9th in 1912. Switching to Connecticut-based Pope Hartford, Howdy again scored a top 10 in 1913 before a valve engine ended his 1914 attempt. Moving to Indianapolis' Stutz Motor Car in 1915, he scored another top 10 that year. The journeyman would also race for Indianapolis-based Premier Motor Car Company in 1916, before racing was suspended altogether in 1917. And Wilcox arrived for the 1919 Liberty 500 without a ride secured. Signed to race alongside 1913 winner Jules Gou in an IMS-sponsored Peugeot. Just 12 days before the race, Wilcox would ultimately qualify the Pug onto the front row. 2 fatal accidents would happen early in the race, as Ralph DePalma dominated early, but Wilcox would take the lead on lap 103 and his Peugeot cruised to victory without ever relinquishing the lead. A brass band during the race, so wrapped up in the thrill of a Hoosier victor, played Back Home Again in Indiana, a new song, as Wilcox won handily. Howdy would help Peugeot develop its new 3-liter twin-cam engine, but would never repeat the success he earned in 1919, failing to score another top 10 finish after his victory before ultimately switching to Miller in Duesenberg in 1923. He would drive relief for teammate Tommy Milton's HCS Miller in 1923, who would ultimately go on to win his second 500 that year. But it was that season where tragedy struck, and Wilcox was killed in his Duesenberg at the Altoona Speedway board track in September. A participant in the first 11 Indianapolis 500s, Wilcox would remain a Hoosier icon for decades after his death. His son, Howdy Wilcox Jr., would go on to found the Little 500 bicycle race at IU, and is not to be confused with an unrelated driver, Howdy Wilcox II, also from Indianapolis. Winning in 1924, and the only co-winner on our list, is Laura L. or LL Corum from Bartholomew County. His birthplace of Jonesville has barely deviated from the size it was when LL was born there in 1899. So that's neat. Starting out on local board tracks, a string of bad accidents prematurely stunted Corum's driving career, and Corum soon transitioned to riding on big cars as a riding mechanic or relief driver. Working for the Chevrolet brothers' Frontenac Motor Corporation, he was a key role in the development of the iconic Fronte Ford dirt car, while later going on to work at Duesenberg, Stutz, and GM. He finished 5th on his rookie debut in 1923, driving a Model T Fronte Ford Special dirt car before returning the following year in a Works Duesenberg, with teammate Joe Boyer starting in the second row. Corum had piloted his car up to 5th by lap 110, but after a poor start by Boyer, Corum was called into the pits in order to give up his seat to the aggressive Boyer, and was instructed by team owner Fred Duesenberg to catch the Millers in front of them, or crash trying. Boyer would go on to drive Corum's Duesenberg the remainder of the race, and would win in a new record time. Boyer had received most of the credit, as well as the prize money, but with Corum being the starting driver, he was named as a co-winner alongside Boyer, despite never having led a lap. Corum would make the show 3 more times, driving for Schmidt, Stutz, and Studebaker. After the 1933 race, however, Corum would retire in Indianapolis, where ailing health would lead him to take his own life in 1949 at age 50. And Corum, an engineer and mechanic first, owns the distinction of having his face on the Borg-Warner trophy without ever leading a lap. George Souders was born and raised in Lafayette in 1900 and grew up in that industrial automotive town. Class president at Jefferson High School, George would matriculate into hometown Purdue University to study mechanical engineering before dropping out after his father died in 1920. He began working for local dirt racing teams and made his driving debut at the horse track at Tippecanoe County's fairgrounds in his hometown. And Souders cut his teeth on these dirt tracks, both in Indiana and in Texas, before he got his first taste of the big car at IMS driving for William White in a Customer Duesenberg in 1927, the same car driven by Pete DiPaolo to victory in 1925. He would qualify the 2-year-old Duesenberg in the 22nd and intended to take his debut 500 easy. But by lap 150, Souders found himself up front as more and more of his competition fell out with mechanical attrition. And when race leader Pete DiPaolo's engine misfired, Souders took the lead on lap 149 and would cruise to victory, the first rookie to win the 500, doing so by nearly 12 minutes. He returned the race in 1928 for White in a Miller and scored a respectable 3rd place. But this would prove to be his final 500. A bad crash at Michigan State Fairgrounds that year put George into a coma for nearly 6 months and destroyed his left arm. He returned to Lafayette and operated a gas station. He briefly sold race car parts and had various odd jobs before he was discovered living alone in a Lafayette trailer park in the early 1970s. When that trailer burned down in December 1974, the racing fraternity and Indianapolis 500 Old Timers Club bought him a new trailer and speedway right next to IMS. And he was looking forward to celebrating the 50th anniversary of his victory in 1977 when he died of natural causes in Lafayette in July 1976 after a series of strokes. Tony Holman paid for the cost of his funeral, and a group of fans purchased the champion a headstone, still sitting where he is buried in Battleground. Our first Indianapolis boy, Louis Schneider, was born to German immigrants in 1901. He attended Shortridge High School and Culver Academy before starting as a motorcycle policeman in his early 20s for Indianapolis. Naturally, Lou started racing motorcycles on dirt tracks. He drove Millers to some moderate successes in his first 500s, culminating in a 3rd place in his own car in 1930. In 1931, he was brought back to race for B.L. Schneider in a Miller-powered Stevens chassis. Battling defending champion Billy Arnold all month, the race started poorly for Lou before rain prevented Billy Arnold from steaming away to a repeat victory. And when Arnold crashed from the lead in turn 3 on lap 162, Schneider inherited the lead as Bill Cummings nipped at his tail. Schneider led the last 48 laps to come home ahead of Fred Frame by 43 seconds, and became the first Indianapolis-born driver to win. He would ride the high of victory at Indianapolis to the 1931 AAA Championship title. And Schneider would make 2 more starts at Indianapolis, but would never again finish in the top 20. He found a second career in midget racing on the West Coast, always as a favorite to win. But his career was also cut short by a crash at City Stadium in San Diego in 1938, where he was pulled from his burning car by spectators. He attempted a comeback, but his injuries proved debilitating, and his health would soon take a nosedive. And Schneider died of tuberculosis in Indianapolis in September of 1942, and is buried in Crown Hill. Bill Cummings, the man Schneider raced for the victory in 1931, was another Indianapolis boy. Born and raised on the West Side, he soon caught the racing bug that many of us West Siders catch early in our lives. The son of a race car driver, Bill would start racing motorcycles at a young age before making his name on the Hoosier Outlaw Sprint circuit, earning the moniker Wild Bill like his father, chewing up dirt tracks such as Jungle Park, Huntington Speedway, and George Rogers Clark Speedway, a nickname that calculated Cummings loathed. Bill was called up to drive in the 1930 AAA Championship and won his first race at tricky Langhorne Speedway in a Miller before winning another at the New York State Fairgrounds in a Duesenberg, scoring an impressive 3rd place in the championship as a rookie. He would go on to score pole at the Indianapolis 500 in 1933 before radiator gremlins ended his chances at the victory. But the following year in 1934, Wild Bill returned as a favorite to win and would qualify in 5th. And by half distance, Cummings was up in 2nd, chasing race leader Maury Rose. Rose and Cummings would swap the lead several times, but it was Wild Bill that would come out on top at the end, and the closest yet finish at Indianapolis. The Westside kid had just won his home race and would capitalize on that to win the 1934 AAA Championship title. He would win the pole again in 1937, but would ultimately never come close to smelling victory. And Cummings was a man. He was a fun, approachable champion, never far from the fans or a camera. But sadly, like many others, Cummings' icon came to a premature end when he was killed in a single-vehicle crash in 1939, driving off the road on Southeastern Avenue into Lick Creek, the last Indianapolis-born driver to win the 500. The final Hoosier champion is arguably the greatest of them all, the patron saint of Indiana racers, savior of Indianapolis, Wilbur Shaw. Born in Shelbyville in 1902, Warren Wilbur Shaw won his first race at the age of 5, riding a goat at the Shelby County Fair. Idolizing the drivers of his childhood, he left school at an early age to work around the speedway as a mechanic. Shaw began building his own cars and would smooth talk any steward that was certain he would kill himself in his machines into letting him race. His charming personality, as well as his raw skill, made Shaw's name on the dirt tracks in the Midwest. Getting his first bite at Indianapolis in 1927, driving for Indianapolis-based owner Fred Clemens, sharing the car with another future 3-time winner Louis Meyer, charged through the field from 32nd to finish 4th in the race, ultimately won by George Souders. Now a professional journeyman, Shaw would start the 1928 race driving for Pete DiPaolo. After a second-place finish driving for Leon Duray in 1933, Shaw could taste the victory. 2 years later, in 1935, he entered as a driver owner, driving a chassis of his own design to yet another runner-up position. In 36, he traveled to and competed in European races, making great connections and being one of the first drivers to bridge the gap between American and European racing. His first 500 victory came in 1937, driving a homemade Shaw chassis with an Offenhauser engine to a close victory over Ralph Hepburn. The following year, he attempted to repeat, but would again settle for second behind Floyd Roberts. Seemingly always a bridesmaid in his own cars, Shaw made the move before the 1939 season to race for powerhouse Maserati. And Kendrick was right when he said, "Start up that Maserati and vroom vroom, I'm racing." Because that's what he did. He cruised to victory in his Maserati in repeat years in 1939 and 1940, becoming the first to win in consecutive years and marking the 6th time in 7 years he would finish in the top 2. Attempting to three-peat in 1941, Shaw had qualified 3rd and was leading on lap 151 when his right rear wheel came off at 110 miles an hour going through turn 1. Going airborne and crashing into the barrier, Shaw had broken his back and had become drenched in race fuel. Luckily, he was pulled from the wreckage by rescue workers before the car burst into flames, but sadly this crash would end Shaw's glorious racing career. When IMS and racing as a whole was shuttered during the Second World War, Shaw worked as a sales manager for Firestone for the Army Air Force before boredom brought him back to IMS. But as IMS had sat abandoned during the war, owner Eddie Rickenbacker was unwilling to repair the site and signaled intention to sell the track to developers. Despaired at the thought of this, Shaw began searching for saviors of the speedway since he was unable to buy the site himself. And hearing him out was Reserve Terre Haute baking powder magnate Tony Holman, who Shaw convinced to buy the dilapidated track from Rickenbacker for $750,000. Appointed IMS president by Holman, Shaw scrambled to throw together a comeback race in 1946. He recruited any team he could, both in the US and in Europe, to race in the event. And as president of IMS, Shaw also sold public admission tickets to time trials for the first time. He spent $300,000 to clean up the track and prepare it for race day, including new grandstands and the reopening of the Speedway golf course. Consequently, 165,000 spectators arrived on race day, an improvement on attendance from even the previous race in 1941. And in the following year, Shaw became an ambassador to the sport with his sharp appearance and shrewd personality, ushering in a new golden age for the Speedway that overshadowed its pre-war reach. But sadly, all good things must come to an end, and the man famous for walking away from calamity's luck ran out, as Shaw was tragically killed at age 51 in a private plane crash in Adams County in 1954. His skill made him a megastar, but his charisma, enthusiasm, and love for the Speedway made him an icon in Indianapolis. And while it's easy to be disappointed that a Hoosier hasn't won a 500 since 1940, a race that was once a regional celebration of Indiana's engineering prowess had become a global marquee event. And while half the field isn't from Indiana in any given year anymore, it's fair to say that Indiana still wins every year.